From daring escapes to shocking confrontations, these are the craziest moments inmates were caught on camera. October 25, 2016, Illinois, Cook County Jail was thrown into chaos when a fight broke out in Division 9, the highest security area where the most dangerous inmates are kept. A few inmates decided to settle their scores, fueled by grudges and power struggle. The lunchroom, usually a pretty boring place, turned into a battlefield as all hell broke loose. 10 inmates got into a brawl, some even using makeshift weapons. Eventually, 20 of them ended up injured, a few with some stab wounds. And it wasn't just the inmates involved here, 2 corrections officers also got caught up in the chaos. One officer got hit in the face with a food tray, and the other got hurt trying to break up the fight. Luckily, no one died, but the whole crazy scene left everyone shaken. August 15, 2021, downtown St. Louis. A disturbance breaks out at City Justice Center, CJC, resulting in injuries to several detainees. The chaos started around 12:30 a.m. when approximately 24 detainees were enjoying some recreation time on the 4th floor. Suddenly, another dirty dozen come along and start attacking 4 others, beating and kicking them. Officers quickly intervened, removing victims from the area, using pepper spray if they had to. Unfortunately, this is just one of many attacks that have occurred within the facility. This happened only 2 weeks after the previous one, marking a total of 6 at the downtown facility in that year alone. And just last year, several inmates assaulted an unarmed guard and held him hostage for 2 hours, demanding hot food in exchange for his release. Looks like trouble's always going down at the CJC. September 23, 2017, chaos erupts at Clayton Facility, a private prison run by the Florida-based GEO Group. Now, what exactly happened that day? Rookie correctional officer Matt Schreiner was doing his rounds on cell block 3's upper tier. He stops at cell 203, where cameras catch him chatting through a locked door with one of the most dangerous inmates in here, Clifton Bloomfield, a notorious convicted serial killer serving multiple life terms after killing 5 people in Albuquerque. The two would exchange a few words, and then in a total disregard for security, Schreiner unlocks Bloomfield's cell door. Next thing you know, Bloomfield attacks Schreiner and overpowers him with a sharpened toothbrush turned homemade weapon. Schreiner's taken hostage but manages to break free. He races down to the main level, grabs his walkie-talkie and sprints for help. But with the keys to the entire 40-man cell block and no guards, the inmates took control. Cell doors were flung open and prisoners went on a brutal rampage. They even barricaded the main entry. Some of them used their own newfound freedom to settle old scores. One inmate suspected of being an informant was brutally assaulted in his cell, with his throat slashed. Other inmates took advantage of the chaos by disabling the prison surveillance cameras, starting a fire, and trashing the cell block. The riot response team steps in, filling the place up with tear gas. Slowly but surely, they round up all the inmates, handcuff them, and escort them to the day room. An inmate attacked in here was found unconscious in a pool of blood. Rescuers quickly pulled him out and called for an ambulance. Miraculously, he survived. In the end, the state had to step in and take over direct operations of that prison once again. I don't think they want this to kind of happen again. It's unfortunate, but riots happen in prisons more often than we'd like to think. March 27, 2018. Things take a dark turn at Cheatham County Jail in Tennessee. A huge fight breaks out, leaving 5 inmates and 2 officers hurt. This whole chaotic ordeal was caught on camera for everyone to see. The sheriff said the riot started because of a feud between inmates. But there's more to it than that, because the jail, which was built for 116 people, was holding around 192, causing tensions to reach a breaking point. After it was all over, 6 inmates were charged for adding fuel to the fire. February 2020. Another riot sparks out at Sandoval County Detention Center in New Mexico. Things got pretty crazy when 9 prisoners refused to get back into their cells. Guards decided to step back, and the administration had to bring in a special task force. But prisoners still weren't willing to give up so easily. They blocked that door, put soapy water all over the place, and they would throw microwaves and other items at this task force. Now, the team had to use flashbangs to confuse the inmates, and eventually they did manage to capture all of them. The prisoners were later charged with unlawful assault on a jail and conspiracy to commit unlawful assault on a jail. January 12, 2021. A unique riot takes place at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. What made this one stand out? Well, it was actually the guards who orchestrated it, not the inmates. A lawsuit that followed claimed that the guards had planned or helped carry out the forced removal of detainees from their cells, even if they didn't comply with orders to handcuff themselves. This was in response to when the detainees allegedly splashed urine and feces at the guards. According to guidelines from the New Jersey Department of Corrections, detainees should only be forcibly removed if they refuse to be handcuffed and leave their cells voluntarily. After these planned extractions, one inmate ended up with a concussion after being forcefully pulled from her cell and struck around 30 times by 5 officers. Another victim, who also didn't comply with orders, suffered skull fractures and was left bloodied and beaten with boot marks all over her body. 15 officers were later indicted by a grand jury for their involvement in these forced cell extractions, with the intention of punishing, intimidating, or terrorizing the inmates. But these incidents were just the tip of the iceberg at this notorious prison. It's faced numerous scandals, including allegations of officers sexually assaulting inmates and even allowing gambling up in here. July 15, 2017. A surveillance video from inside the Rio Arriba County Jail in Tierra Amarilla caught accused murderer Eamon Herrera attacking several guards. At the time, Herrera was accused of committing 5 murders across northern New Mexico. It was believed that he killed his stepdad, brother, and mother before gunning down 2 strangers. From the video, it's evident that Herrera had a plan. While on an hour break outside his cell, Herrera asked a guard to check on his sink. As the guard went to inspect it, he closed the door behind him, trapping him inside. He then quickly grabs a flashlight hidden under a nearby desk and waits for another guard to pass by. As the guard runs through the hallway, Herrera strikes him with a heavy metal flashlight. A struggle ensued with the guard using a plastic chair to defend himself. Now a third guard's here, and Herrera was finally subdued and placed into a restraining chair. He was later convicted of 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders, as well as several charges related to assaulting the guards. September 15, 2018. A familiar scene unfolds at Cook County Jail. A bus carrying a group of handcuffed inmates made its way to court into Chicago's suburbs. Now this is all kind of routine, with detainees attending their hearings and returning to jail without any issues. However, there are times when things go south, especially when dangerous inmates are involved, like those who were supposed to be transported separately. One such inmate was Gavanti Surratt. He was locked up in August 2016 on a burglary charge. While on bail, he allegedly committed a series of armed robberies, leading to his return to jail. During his time in jail, he was reportedly involved in at least 15 fights. Now, despite his troubled history, Surratt was placed on a bus heading towards a hearing. During the trip, he managed to free himself and attacked another inmate using a steel lock and chain of the restraints as a weapon. In the following years, he was involved in 4 more fights, 2 of which occurred on buses. Seems like he didn't learn his lesson, or perhaps the authorities failed to learn theirs. February 15, 2017, 19-year-old Antoine Jones was detained and charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Takia Holmes, a girl from Chicago who got shot in the head. Jones opened fire on 3 rival gang members in the neighborhood after a drug turf dispute, and sadly a stray bullet hit this poor innocent girl while she was riding in the van with her mom. In a surveillance video from the Cook County Sheriff's Department, Jones appears to be sleeping while he was handcuffed to a chair in the holding room before appearing in bond court. Then out of nowhere, another inmate comes up and repeatedly punches him. Interestingly, the inmate was detained on his own murder charge, but the murder of an innocent girl had clearly struck a nerve with him. The inmate was issued a disciplinary ticket. As for Jones, he was given 71 years in prison earlier this year. As you've already seen in prison, it's not common for inmates to really team up to settle scores with each other. But sometimes, though, they have issues with corrections officers, and things can get pretty messy very quickly. This happened a couple of times down in Arizona. November 3rd, 2020, a few inmates took turns attacking a single officer. The assault went on for about 2 minutes before any backup showed up, with the officer managing to get out on his own. Then on June 21st, 2021, a corrections officer had to be airlifted to the hospital after a brutal assault. Prison officials later say that both attacks were because of the same security issue, custody override, which basically means that security levels were lowered, putting them in less secure areas. But seriously, why would anybody put a super dangerous inmate in a less secure unit? Looks like a lot of prison officials need to think about that for a bit, because we got many more to go through on this list today. Here we have Deputy Daniel Guzman from Washington County caught off guard when an inmate starts a fight with him. This lasts about 30 seconds, but for Guzman, those may have been the longest 30 seconds of his life. Late March 2019, Deputy Guzman had just started an overtime shift. The inmates were enjoying some free time, and everything seemed normal until Guzman noticed an inmate circling his desk in the middle of the pod. The inmate turned out to be Hayden Davis, who was in jail at that time for breaking into a Beaverton home. Guzman greeted Davis, but he didn't respond. Suddenly, Davis lunges at him out of nowhere. Guzman's training kicked in and he shoves him to create some distance. Now, Guzman could have jumped on Davis and handcuffed him. The thought of being on the ground with over 50 inmates, though, was terrifying. He didn't know who was there to help and who wasn't. Davis charges at Guzman again, and that's when the fight begins. Luckily, another inmate intervened, grabbing Davis and throwing him to the ground, allowing Guzman to regain control of the situation. Guzman would suffer minor injuries to his eye and knuckles. As for Davis, he was given over 6 years in prison for that fight and the original crime that landed him in jail. July 16, 2019, Mitchell Lamb and Alex Benacomo, guards at the Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility, entered a pod housing 16 inmates. They intended to put the pod on lockdown due to a verbal altercation between an inmate and a control center officer. However, their plans were disrupted when 5 inmates rushed them into a hallway, where they were assaulted for a half a minute. During the attack, the inmates used the guards' flashlights and radios as a weapon to punch, kick, and beat down the guards. Lamb and Benacomo would walk out of here with non-life-threatening injuries, while 7 inmates were charged in connection with the incident, 2 of whom were charged with attempted murder. August 15, 2017, we're still in New Mexico, where things get even crazier. 2 officers at the Penitentiary of New Mexico were dealing with some seriously dangerous inmates when they were stabbed with shivs. The officers, just starting their shift, patted down inmates as they left their cells. 2 of the inmates, Lorenzo and Joe Martinez, decided to cause some trouble. Lorenzo distracted an officer while Joe snuck up behind him, grabbed his neck, and stabbed him in the back of the head multiple times. Another officer tried to intervene, but Lorenzo attacked him too. Thankfully, a 3rd officer stops this chaos by firing non-lethal rounds from a shotgun. The guards survived the brutal attack and eventually made a full recovery. The 2 inmates were charged and convicted of battery on a peace officer and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They're now serving a lengthy prison sentence. December 5th, 2016. A shocking incident occurs at Cook County Jail in Chicago, Illinois. An inmate named Jimmy Smith was caught on camera punching a female guard in his cell. The attack happened when a guard caught Smith using a laptop to watch a talk show called My Back's Against the Wall. Smith, who was seen in jail for 7 years facing charges of attempted murder and assault, didn't take kindly to the guard trying to take away his laptop. He reacted violently, hitting her in the face. Luckily, other male officers quickly intervened and Smith surrendered without further incident. And actually, the video on the laptop turned out to be Smith hosting a show with inappropriate pictures of himself inside the jail. Smith had been given the laptop to help with his defense for his court case, but instead he ended up with more charges. A charge of aggravated battery to a correctional officer, which would extend his sentence. April 6, 2017. The peace and quiet of North Mississippi got a rude awakening, thanks to a University of Mississippi business major from Brandon named Daniel Stewart Berry, who was accused of robbing a local store. During his trip to court, Berry completely lost it, headbutting a deputy in a fit of rage. The officer quickly takes control, and everyone is left wondering if Berry was under the influence of something, though the exact substance was unknown. Berry's outburst didn't do him any favors, as his bail was increased to $200,000. We don't even know if he could pay it or not. November 25, 2017. A violent attack takes place at Rikers Island, involving Captain Gorey of the New York City Department of Correction. While doing rounds in the housing area with 2 other captains, Captain Gorey was suddenly attacked by an inmate who punched him in the face and knocked him to the floor. 2 other inmates then joined in on that assault. The inmate who started the attack was identified as Jason Reed, a known gang member. Gorey was left to defend himself after being separated from his colleagues, but managed to gain the upper hand until 2 other inmates joined in. Several other guards eventually brought the situation under control, and the captain was taken to the hospital. In response to the incident, the president of Correction Captains Association mentioned that the assaults on officers unfortunately happen too often at Rikers. However, it's not just the officers who are victims of these brutal attacks at Rikers. Sometimes, the inmates themselves get assaulted by none other than the correctional officers. 2015, The New Yorker gets their hands on surveillance footage from Rikers Island that kind of raises concern about the abuse and violence inmates face. The clip shows a guard come into Browder's cell to take him to the shower, but instead of just escorting him, the guard ends up slamming Browder, who was already handcuffed, to the ground and holds him down. 2 more guards rushed over to join in. Browder ended up spending 3 years at Rikers. 2 of those were in solitary, all because he was accused of stealing a backpack in May 2010. He was finally released in June 2013 when charges against him were dropped. February 4th, 2022. Deputies at the Loudoun County Adult Detention Center in Virginia noticed that inmate Richard Pilland had covered his cell window with toothpaste to block their view. Pilland refused to follow orders, so deputies had to use the pepper spray. Medical staff then tries to help by washing off that spray, but after that, Pilland was taken to a nearby shower, but he gets aggressive before he can even get in. So they had to put him in an emergency restraint chair and take him to the shower in the medical area. When they turned on the water, the system controls had failed, and the water got way too hot. This guy had first and second degree burns after being left in that water for about 45 seconds. His family sued the county for $7 million, saying their son was tortured as he was forced into that hot water. The lawsuit was settled for $500,000. May 19, 2016, a disturbing video was released by Buffalo Police, revealing the mistreatment of inmate Shane Porter by jail attendant Matthew Jaskula. The events leading up to the violent altercation remain unclear. Here we see Jaskula aggressively lunging at Porter, who was handcuffed, and slamming him into a nearby door. 2 other cell block attendants followed him into another room, where Porter is then thrown to the floor and dragged across the tile. In another shot from a different angle, Jaskula is seen dragging Porter across the floor like a rag doll. Porter is placed in a cell, and 2 other officers proceed to strip him of his clothes, while he stands in a puddle of his own blood. He's then restrained and wheeled into another cell, where he's left waiting for assistance. After more than 90 minutes, Porter's finally removed from the restraint chair and taken out of his cell. He's then escorted out of city lockup bloodied without shoes or pants, and placed in the back of a squad car with no ambulance in sight. As a result of his excessive use of force in violation of Porter's civil rights, Jaskula was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, and as a settlement for the trauma he endured, the city paid Porter $300,000. We all know tensions can run high between inmates and correctional officers, but sometimes they end up being each other's heroes. June 23, 2016, Gary Grimm was on duty at Parker County District Courthouse in Texas when he suddenly fell ill. The inmates in the holding cell noticed Officer Grimm slumped over and unresponsive, so they sprang into action. Surveillance videos from the courthouse show the inmates shouting, banging on walls, and even breaking out of their cell to get help from deputies in the courtroom above. When the officers arrived, they found Officer Grimm without a pulse and immediately called paramedics. Thanks to the quick thinking and actions of the inmates, Officer Grimm's life was saved as he was having a heart attack. After the incident, Grimm expressed his gratitude, saying,
"If they wished harm for me, all they had to do was sit there and do nothing. Instead of overtaking me and taking my gun and killing me, or taking a hostage and escaping, they looked at me as a human being."
A similar incident happened in Florida when a teen who had been arrested for violating his juvie probation saved the life of the cop who was booking him in jail. September 2014, Fort Lauderdale police officer Franklin Folks collapsed from chest pain as he was booking Jamal Rutledge. Folks fell back while he was doing paperwork, started struggling on the ground, grabbing at his chest. Jamal sprang into action and started kicking the security door, alerting the other officers to the situation. 2 officers rushed to the scene, grabbed a defibrillator, and performed CPR on Folks, ultimately saving his life. Medical personnel later said that Jamal's quick thinking played a big part in the officer's survival. August 2016, a crazy incident goes down at Payne County Jail. Inmate Tashka Robert Frank Moret decided to take a swing at a detention officer in the booking area. He then proceeded to pick him up and throw him to the ground. Now another inmate, Robert Charles Hammock, wasn't having any of that. About 15 seconds into the scuffle, Hammock jumped in to help out the detention officer. He grabbed Merritt and restrained him until backup arrived. As we've just seen, correctional officers and inmates can help each other. However, it's not always for the best reasons. April 29, 2022, Casey White, who was waiting trial for a capital murder case, managed to escape from the Lauderdale County Jail in Florence, Alabama. And guess who helped him? None other than correctional officer Vicky White. Vicky orchestrated the whole thing, telling her colleagues that this was a scheduled mental health evaluation at the courthouse. But their plan didn't last long. May 9th, law enforcement caught up with Casey and Vicky in Evansville, Indiana. After a manhunt that ended with Casey crashing the car he was driving, Vicky tragically shot herself in the head, while Casey was apprehended and brought back to Alabama. Under Alabama's felony murder rule, Casey was initially charged with Vicky's murder. However, the charge was dropped when Casey pled guilty to prison escape on May 5th, 2023. August 31st, 2023, another convicted murderer, Danilo Cavalcante, managed to escape custody. Surveillance footage captures Cavalcante casually walking to a back wall in the exercise yard, glancing around, and then grabbing onto a razor wire fence. He pulls off a Spider-Man move, pressing his feet against the wall, and climbs up until he vanishes from sight. Turns out on September 13th, they found him hiding. And as he attempted to crawl away, he was apprehended, believe it or not, by a law enforcement dog named Yoda. June 2022, two inmates pull off a daring escape from Hamilton County Justice Center. Security footage captures Melissa Cordell and George Bridewell escaping while they were being booked into the jail. They were able to blend in with the other released inmates while waiting to be processed. On June 8th, there were no officers around when Melissa was being booked. The video shows her on the phone testing out a door. When she realizes it's unlocked, she takes her chance and makes her way into the property area. Cordell then hid behind a pole in a wall. After a clerk returned property to inmates leaving the jail, Cordell then took off her inmate outfit and left with them. She was captured a day later. On June 20th, George Bridewell was waiting to be arraigned in a holding tank. A deputy was releasing people from a cell in the same area. Now the deputy had a list and was calling out names. He realized Bridewell wasn't on that list and told him to go back to the cell. But as public defenders asked to open the cell door to gather information, Bridewell took the opportunity. He joined a group of inmates being processed to leave and walked out with them. September 2nd, 2016, a homicide suspect from Nevada managed to escape from police custody in a pretty wild way. Alonzo Perez, the suspect, was handcuffed to a table in a police interview room when he decided to try and break free. He twisted his body until he was able to snap the hinges off the handcuffs holding his right wrist to the table. After breaking free, he climbed onto the chair and then up to the ceiling to make his escape. Even though he was still wearing ankle chains and the broken cuff on his right wrist, Perez managed to drop from the ceiling into a hallway, run out a door, and steal a work truck that was left idling in a nearby parking lot. After a 4-day manhunt, Perez was recaptured and eventually sentenced to life in prison for 3 murder charges. October 18, 2019, 17-year-old Quantrell D. Schwartzlow pulled off a daring escape from the Rock County Sheriff's Office in Janesville, Wisconsin. He'd been left alone in this interview room after being arrested on suspicion of strangulation and sexual assault. Surveillance footage captures the teen making a break for it as soon as the detective exited the room. He wasted no time, opening the blinds and pushing out the window before taking a leap from 12 feet up. Another camera caught him sprinting across the lawn, making a clean getaway. When the detective returned 14 minutes later, the room was empty and the window was wide open. Despite his escape, Schwartzlow was eventually recaptured. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 2 years of extended supervision for the strangulation charges, as well as the same amount of time for his escape. February 2023, Eddie Villalobos was brought into court by a deputy who followed the law by removing his handcuffs and leg shackles. But as soon as he set him free, he made a run for it, leaving the deputy in the dust as he sprinted down the hallway and out of the building. Eddie was in court to face charges for the fatal stabbings of 2 people back in 2021. Unfortunately for Villalobos, his taste of freedom was short-lived. The sheriff's department quickly sprang into action, and after a few hours, they found him hiding in a nearby apartment under a blanket in a closet. He was promptly taken back into custody and later sentenced to life in prison. 2019. Disguising himself as his own daughter during her visit, Brazilian gang leader Clavino da Silva attempted a daring escape. He tried walking out of the main door of that penitentiary in her place, but sharp-eyed officials quickly caught on to that scheme and made him strip in front of their cameras. After his failed escape, Da Silva was moved to a max security unit within the prison, and just 3 days later, he was found dead in his cell. Prison officials reported that he had taken his own life.
What is, we got an escapee.
Oh,
And on April 5th, 2006, just hours after breaking out of a super secure prison, Richard Lee McNair, a convicted killer, somehow managed to trick a cop into thinking he was just a regular jogger.
Where do you live at?
down the road by Pineville.
Pineville?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do you have any form of identification on you?
No, man.
What's your name?
Robert Jones.
Richard McNair's a notorious American murderer, known for his ability to escape custody and avoid getting caught. Back in '87, he killed a man and shot another during a robbery gone wrong. He is currently locked up for those crimes, plus his multiple prison breaks. McNair pulled off 3 daring escapes from 3 different prisons, using some pretty clever tactics. The first time, he used lip balm to slip out of the handcuffs. Then he would crawl through a ventilation duct for his second escape. And on his last one in 2006, he would hide in a pile of mail bags and managed to convince a police officer who stopped him that he was just out for a jog.
Do jog again in the future. Carry some ID with you.
All right.
That's our quick line there.
Have a good day now.
Be careful, buddy.
Thank you.
All right.
This guy made it all the way to Canada twice to evade capture, roaming around the country for over a year, before finally getting caught in a routine police check in 2007.